Well, it's time. Welcome into Wintercast 1.0 presented by State Farm Jared Swift. And boy, do we have a lot to cover in this thing. We'll cover a little bit about what our outlook is, how we got there, what type of Enzo phase we're in, that'll make sense here in a minute, and why all that's important. So, without further ado, let's not waste any time. Let's get right into the information. So, the first thing that I want to look at here and just kind of show you, and I'll break it down, is the Enzo forecast from NOAA that's put onto this website here, iri.columbia.edu. We'll credit them in the YouTube and Facebook comments or briefing below, I should say. But this is very important, right? Because what the Pacific Ocean is doing and how that's acting and how that's trending is directly relevant to our weather here. It makes changes in the jet stream, how the jet stream is shaped, makes differences in our temperatures, and overall just changes the shape and the pattern of how our weather moves, especially here in Kentucky and throughout pretty much all of the United States. So, that said, here are the model predictions of Enzo from October 2024 to the winter. And here you go. You got kind of a moderate La Nina here, and that is basically the cooling phase of the Pacific Ocean. Sometimes, some years it cools, sometimes, some years it warms. And a warming trend is called an El Nino. And an El Nino is actually what we had last winter. But as you can see here, been a pretty neutral last 12 months or so, going in toward the winter time frames, getting a bit stronger on the La Nina. We're kind of basically looking at this thicker line through here. That's the median, the black line, if you will. You can kind of start there where my mouse is now. Just kind of follow it through here. It's kind of neutral. So not a very strong La Nina. And quite frankly, we don't have to go far back to see a phase like this before. It's really important to take what we're looking at now with the Enzo phase and what we've seen this year, event-wise, right, storm-wise, rain-wise, pattern-wise, and find a year that's a bit comparable. So, but you can kind of get a look into. It's not always 100% accurate, but it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect. And that year is December, or that month and year, that time frame is going to be 2022 to 2023. So again, we don't have to go back very far here, right? And you can see kind of the same thing. Last winter, or the winter before that, it was a very strong La Nina, very strong. And that is the reason we had a bit more severe weather, right? The jet stream was set up a lot better for some more trough action to occur. More warm air was coming up from the Gulf, and that was mixing with cold fronts that were coming in from Canada. And that's how we were getting so many strong, severe events, like in 2021, for example. So here's January of 2022. You can see it's a bit more neutral. And matter of fact, it trends to a more neutral after a bit of a dive on the stronger side. So pretty similar tracks here when it comes to El Nino, how the phases were trending beforehand and trending afterwards. So pretty similar to 2022, 2023. In 2022 and 2023, unfortunately, we did see some severe weather, especially New Year's Day, like down toward Bowling Green, right where they saw that EF3 tornado. So we have. Again, that does not necessarily mean the exact same thing is happening, but the trends are there, and that's why we have some of the things forecasted that we're going to show you here in a couple minutes later on in the video, the way that we do. So those are your Enzo trends, and let's go ahead and look at what our actual forecast is for this winter. Let's not waste any time. Let's get right into the information. So starting here with our projections for this winter, I want to kind of point out that a lot of these are based off of statewide averages. So local county averages might be a little bit different than these statewide averages. So I want to just point that out real quickly that, for example, in southeastern Kentucky, where you're a little bit higher up in the elevations, obviously your snow averages are a little bit higher than places like, let's say, Elizabethtown, Kentucky, right? You're a little bit higher up. You're almost always going to see a little bit of higher residual snowfall totals down there. So just keep that in mind as we're going throughout all of our projections here, that some of the local averages might be a bit different than the statewide averages. But overall, first up here are average temperatures. In yellow is what your average usually is every year based upon the last couple of decades. And in pink is how we feel will be different this season versus the average. So for example, in December, your high temperature is usually around 44 degrees. Obviously, you're going to have some days where it's a little bit colder than that, some days where it's a little bit hotter than that. These are averages based upon a 30 or 31 day period inside of that month, or in February's case, a 28 day period inside of that month. So for example, in December, the high is about 44 degrees, and we feel like that average high might be a little bit higher this year, about 2 degrees higher when all is said and done, 1 degree higher on the low side. In January, relatively equal chances, however, about a degree or so higher than the averages in February. We do feel like it's pretty equal, right on par with 46 and 32. Once again, want to point out some days are going to be a bit warmer, some days are going to be a bit colder. These are averages over that monthly period. So I do think overall this winter we'll see mainly warmer than average temperatures with several cold blasts coming in. Pretty much your average winter in Kentucky. It'll feel like 60 degrees one day and then the wake up tomorrow morning and it's 10 degrees outside. I think we'll see similar situations this winter. Now, moving on to our rain chances. Now, something interesting popped up when we were doing our data pool and we were diving all into the information. The last few winters in Kentucky have been rainier than average. So the averages are starting to come up a little bit when it comes to rain during the winter months. As a matter of fact, I believe since about 2021, we've had higher than average rain every single winter since then. So I do think you have about equal chances of about 3.5 inches of rain or so throughout the entire portion of Kentucky for December. In January, that average is about 2.5 inches. I think we'll be a smidge above that, near that 3 inch number once again. In February, the average is about 2.8 inches, and I do think that we're talking about basically the right being right on average when it comes to that. Now this is just rainfall. Now, we'll see some liquid that comes down in the form of sleet, snow, and unfortunately, maybe sometimes ice, right? These are not factoring those three scenarios in. This is just rainfall. So, these are our projections for December, January, and February when it comes to rainfall. Moving on now to the hot topic at hand here. So the last few winters have been a bit more severe than we're used to in Kentucky, and most notably 2021 and 2022, and even 2023. Really, so I suppose the last three winters have, of course, been a bit more severe than we're perhaps used to in Kentucky. Unfortunately, I do think that trend continues this winter. The reason for that, once again, being that La Nina phase that we're going into even stronger, right? Typically produces warmer and wetter conditions around here for us, and in the winter I think it's important to remember you don't need as much of those severe metrics that you do, like let's say in the spring or summer. For example, when it comes to instability or CAPE or buoyancy, if you've ever heard one of those three terms, they all basically mean the same thing. Basically, it's fuel for the storm to thrive. In the spring or summer, you really want that number if you're looking for severe weather above about 1,000 joules per kilogram. In the winter, I have seen several severe events the last 3 or 4 years where we've had CAPE in the 2 to 300s, and it's been performing quite well. Again, you don't need as much, let's say, forcing or instability or energy for the storm to thrive in the winter. So I think it's important to have that context, keep that in mind, because we won't have situations where we have. I don't think we're looking at another Mayfield event, right? I can't forecast that. No one can forecast that. That was such an anomalous event because if you can remember, if you were with us at that time, we explained that was such a spring type of event in the winter. We had so much CAPE, so much wind shear. We had so many things going the wrong ways, basically, for that event. Now, when it comes to severe weather this winter, I do think in December we have a bit more than maybe 2 rounds of severe weather. In January, I think it's about equal at about 2 rounds. And in February, I think it's a little bit lower than 2 rounds. Basically, following the trend of the last few La Nina winters. It's been a bit more active in December. We know that from the December 10th tornadoes, right? It's been a bit more active in January. We know that from the New Year's tornadoes. It's been a little bit less active on the severe side, but a little bit more active on the wintry side in February. So these are all pretty much going off of the basic trends that we've seen the last 3 or 4 years. Hopefully, this part of our forecast is wrong. I would love to have a winter where it's just, rain, snow, and that's all we're worrying about. But of course, revisionist history here. We have to lean into the last few trends. The last few trends have been a little bit more severe weather than not the last few years. So when it comes to severe weather, unfortunately, we do expect a little bit more than average, if you will. And when it comes to what type of severe weather, obviously we can't forecast this far out. However, in the winter, if you get severe weather, usually it's wind-based or tornado-based. We don't usually see a whole lot of hail in the winter, which is quite ironic if you really think about it. But once again, take that with a grain of salt. Take that how you will. We can't forecast the type of severe weather this far out. However, we do know that severe weather is probably likely, especially mid-December to mid-January.
Come on in.
Hey, it's George here, and I wanted to do something a little bit different for these folks. Instead of just rolling the classic pictures and telling you to go give them a call and yada yada yada, I wanted to let you know that these are people that we choose, Brian and I, to do all of our insurance through. Not only that, but moreover, they do so much for our community, right? They give so many bikes away to the bikes and trikes. They're giving books away. They're at all kinds of events, sponsoring different races, different companies. Of course, working with us here, more so than anything in my eyes, one of the greatest things they do is they take the time and money out of their pockets in their day to go give underprivileged kids a better Christmas. And to me, that as a kid that came up and was struggling for quite a while, that's amazing. People like that can inspire our younger folks. So not only is this an insurance company, it's a pillar in our community. So I urge you, even though they didn't ask me to, I urge you to reach out to them, see if you can work with them, see if you can do your business through them, because they take some of that money and they give it back, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So thank you for allowing me to talk to you here. I hope you give them a call. Moving on now to the part that everyone's been waiting for. Potentially higher than average snowfalls for some areas in Kentucky based upon our projections, and a basically average snowfall for most folks in Kentucky. The average snowfall in Kentucky is about 7 to 12 inches, and in fact, that number might be coming down. It's based upon the last few years. Now, of course, remember, like we said earlier in the broadcast, southeastern corner of the state, places like Harlan, Kentucky to Pikeville. Remember, your local averages are probably going to be a little bit higher than the 7 to 12 inches. So of course, take this with a grain of salt. But overall, speaking wise, we feel like that northwestern and north central portion of the state may be in play for a slightly higher than average winter. We worded it very carefully, potentially higher than average, right? The reason for that is, again, in that La Nina phase, you're going to have these battle zones set up. A lot like, almost like last year. If you think about Tennessee, Nashville area, and even up into like places like Somerset, Kentucky, who on a couple of events really overperformed. I remember forecasting, I think it was 3 to 5 inches for Somerset during one of those middle January events last year. They ended up getting almost 10 inches. And the reason for that, deformation bands, slightly heavier than the rest of the event that's ongoing. Deformation bands can locally enhance rainfall or snowfall rates. Right, we had that set up in numerous places. I remember Frankfurt, our teammate Neil up there, their place overperformed at one point because they had a deformation band set up. Same thing for Somerset, same thing for Pikeville. So a lot of those folks ended up getting a little bit more snowfall than forecast last year. The reason for that was deformation bands, and I do think we'll look at that potential this year. However, because we're going into a bit of a different phase than what we were at this time of last year, I think those deformation band chances probably scoot west a little bit to where a little bit more of the cold air may be available. Of course, this can set up anywhere in Kentucky, but as of now, based upon the data that we're seeing, based upon looking at the last 20 years of winters here in Kentucky, when we get these types of setups, I remember back in 2016, Paducah ended up seeing an 8-inch or 9-inch snowfall storm somewhere around 2016, 2017, because of a battle zone that set up. Just south of that was all rain. Just north of that felt like very dry, light snow. But right where that battle zone set up, deformation band, heavier rainfall rates, being hovering around 30 to 31 degrees, will get you those bigger, more accumulating snowfall flakes, right? So I think that's what we're looking at when it may come to the northwestern, north central portion of the state. Of course, this is just a guess at this point. This is not, of course, anything that's got 100% legs. But I do think if there's a chance of this occurring in the state, it's got to be that northwestern and north central portion of the state. One, for the fact of you're just due. You're just due. This portion of the state has been gypped the last 3 or 4 years when it comes to snow events. It really has been. It's mainly been sleet for this portion of the state. So one, the fact of the matter is, going back to that baseball analogy, you're just due. You're just due for a good winter. And number two, when you get these types of La Nina phases, again, you have that cool air battling that warm air. You have that warm rain battling that cold rain, right? And you just have all these battle zones set up. Somewhere in the middle of those battle zones, you're always going to have a winter. That winter last year basically seemed to be from Nashville, Tennessee to Somerset, Kentucky. That usually was the winter last year. This year, I think that winter may be about 175 miles northwest. So, again, we'll see. I do think someone I do think some portion, some swath of the state does see higher snowfall than the rest of the state, while the rest of the state is just kind of looking around. I do think at this current time, this of course this may change. That higher swath might be northwestern and north central Kentucky. So that's your snowfall forecast for the year there, or for the winter, I should say.